And now, it's time for TJwow.
Good morning, everybody. Good evening if you're in Australia, and wherever you are today, welcome to our Training Journal webinar. I am your host. My name is Jo Cook. I'm the Deputy Editor of Training Journal. I'm really pleased to be with you today, really looking forward to another one of our fabulous discussion webinars. And the whole point, the whole way that we are looking at this, well, from the quote from Leonard-Cross, I think really highlights it for me. It's about conversation being really powerful. The way that we've designed these sessions is we wanted to make sure that what we were focusing on was very much the conversation you have. I always think, for instance, that actually it's at a conference that a coffee and chatting to people, or maybe it's in the pub and having a glass of wine, there where I always get most out of a session. And that's what I wanted to look at today. We don't have any presentations, we don't have any PowerPoint from our speakers. It's all about good quality conversation. Now, you guys are already using that chat window. Please use that to introduce yourself, to say hello, to share web links with each other, to think, oh, actually I've written something about that, and share it, or to ask questions. But also, if you want to ask questions, we do have our question and answer pod. If you want to make sure that you've got a question stands out from the crowd, let us know. You might not see them all, but I will, and I will address them. I absolutely promise. So if you've got a microphone, if it's connected, you can use that raise hand icon at the top of the screen and let us know if you want to speak, or in the chat window. You can join us on Twitter, as we've already been discussing. Now, everything will be available online for you to have a look at, including our next webinars. We've got an interesting one next month, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. So these are the people that we have with us today. We have Elouise, Leonard-Cross, we have Ryan, Tracey, and we also have Paul McElvaney. Now, I think it's about time that we got them to introduce themselves. So let me bring over some of our webcams. Let's see if we can get this all set up and we can say a proper hello and get some introductions going. So we're going to do some unmuting, and gosh, I've just seen that I'm completely whited out here, so I've got terrible colour balance, but I'm sure you'll forgive me. So let's do a little bit of a round robin and get some introductions. Let's start, first of all, Ryan, it's what, 7 p.m. in Australia for you. So tell us a little bit more about what your role is, Ryan, and what it is that you do.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Tracey. I'm the e-learning manager at AMP, a financial services organisation in Sydney, Australia. 7 p.m. at night. My role is in HR, so my focus is on enterprise-wide training initiatives and trying to modernise that with technology. We've got people everywhere, not just in Sydney, so we leverage technology where we can to reach those people. But more importantly, I think, is to use technology to make the training more effective and more engaging.
That sounds absolutely fabulous, and that's what we were talking about just before we started the recording, was making sure that it's engaging and it's to the point. It's not just using technology for the sake of it. So let's go round here and say a hello to Elouise. So Elouise, before I get you to introduce yourself, I do have to say you are on the cover of our latest Training Journal magazine, which I think is absolutely fabulous, and you look gorgeous. So tell us, why are you on our cover, Elouise, and what is it that you do?
Okay, thank you. Yes, the very pink front cover. My work for Home Group, and one of the reasons that Debbie spoke to me about being part of Training Journal for this month was because at Home Group we've been on a big kind of cultural change program. We won the OD program of...
Ooh, we might have a little bit of audio issue here, or Wi-Fi issue. We'll come back to Elouise. It seems like she's having a bit of a technical trouble. We'll come back to Elouise. She's just dropped out. I know she's on Wi-Fi and couldn't get that any difference on that, so we'll come back to Elouise in just a moment. But Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Morning, Joe. Hi, everyone. My name is Paul McElvaney. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Learning Pool. We're a UK-based e-learning company that works with about 400 organisations across the UK, Ireland, and increasingly in some countries that are further afield, to help them use learning technologies to improve how they deliver their services and train their staff. So we deliver. We're part of the TJwow Learning Management Network and deliver the TJwow LMS to about 300 of our customers. And we've also been involved in building the ADAPT e-learning framework for responsive e-learning design, which some of the people on the call might have been familiar with. So that's what we do.
Great, thank you very much, Paul.
I'm in Dublin this morning, by the way, which is typically grey.
I don't know, it wasn't so great when I was over there recently. It was gorgeous and hot and lovely, which is where I met you, Paul, and we were talking about, when I met you, you gave a great presentation around kind of learning design and good instructional practice and stuff. Just give us some highlights about your thoughts around technology, but design and learning need and business performance all rolled in together, because I thought what you were saying was great.
Yeah, so I think, we work with about 400 customers right now, and one of the things that I kind of always tell my team about our customers is that they have more sense than money. So and I think that's probably a good thing. Although on days we wish it was the other way around. But I think what that means is that they're really interested in using learning technologies to drive better performance. So in some respects, they don't really care about the technology, they only care about the business outcomes. So I think the customers that we work with who are building the best value in their L&D are those that are aligned with what the organizations are trying to achieve, and really using some commodity type services, technologies that are usable enough at a price point that everyone can afford, so that they can drive that business value. And then it's really about pulling that down into some practical business outcomes. For us as a supplier, the challenge has to be slightly different, because we've always got to be conscious of the fact that our customers' needs will change. And if I look at where we are compared to where we were about 3 years ago, the demand of learners, for example, has gone massively through the roof. People expect their technology to be every bit as good, every bit as interesting, and every bit as engaging as the technology they use in their homes, whether that's gamey type content, whether that's just simple browsing experience that doesn't make them want to cry, really. And some of the corporate training solutions that people have been used to have tended to be like that, but I think it is changing. And I think my job is to look at some of the new things that are coming out, and certainly there's plenty of that. And I think someone once said that whenever technology gets boring, that's when it really gets interesting. And certainly there's a number of technologies that are, I think, at that point at the moment where they're starting to be boring, which really means that they work, and they can be used at a price that isn't going to scare normal organizations off.
That's interesting. And I was thinking, just as you were saying that, about the newer technologies, things like virtual reality is getting a lot more traction now, but I think we'll come back to some of those things in just a moment. We've got Elouise back with us, so let's see if we can continue that introduction, Elouise. So you were talking about home group and what it is that you were doing. Let's see if we can get that going again.
Yeah, so I guess for Home Group, obviously winning the OD Programme of the Year was driven by our Programme of Cultural Change, which has gone over a few years. So some of the stuff we've been doing is more recently implementing quite a big technology change, so implementing new kit, worker definitions, and then moving different to a learning platform with sort of more of a blended solution, so using videos, learning libraries, technology, and really trying to get people to use kit more regularly day to day, I guess, has been the biggest challenge, to replace the traditional ways of working with maybe more technology, maybe more connected way, being a UK-wide organisation.
That's great. Thank you. Fantastic introduction. So guys, if you've got thoughts or comments, you can use that chat window, or if you've got questions. And Ryan, I'd like to get your kind of thoughts on this, because from my understanding and from your blog, you are really kind of into the technology. And like Paul was saying, it's a little bit about kind of, is a technology kind of getting boring and standard, or is there new stuff out there that we can't use? Or what are you seeing at the moment, Ryan? And then I'll go to a question that we've got.
I am into the technology, but I would emphasize the fact that I'm not an IT guy. I'm not a coder or anything like that. And I don't think that you need too much IT know-how in order to get into this kind of stuff. And with technology, my advice is always to give it a go. So with Pokemon Go, for example, that's incredibly popular, as we all know. I wasn't really interested in playing it, but because of its sheer popularity, just over the weekend, I gave it a shot just to see what it's all about. And I think you can apply that to all different types of technology, even virtual reality. Google Cardboard is $20, and you can get free apps, and you can see what it's all about. So I think, you know, a lot of people get scared off by technology, but I think you can do a lot with it for not a lot of money. And then, of course, you've got the other end of the spectrum where you can spend however much money you have on technology as well. So I think people shouldn't restrict themselves based on assumptions, and they should just have a look at it and get an informed opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And we all make assumptions, don't we? We all put those restrictions on something because we don't understand. So many of you know that I work a lot with virtual training and webinars, and lots of people just kind of haven't got any idea, and then they attend something and they go, oh wow, I didn't know it could do that. And that's not necessarily because they're choosing to do that, but we just don't know what we don't know. So yeah, and it's really interesting you're saying about kind of there's lots of cheap, there's lots of free stuff out there that you can go and put together, as well as obviously going and finding some of the bigger, more robust solutions. There's a great question from Paul Norrington in our question and answer pod, so thank you, Paul, for that. He says, are the experts here finding, and I don't think they'd like to call themselves experts, but I do, are the experts here finding more organisations are interested in buying off-the-shelf e-learning rather than customising it themselves? So let's go to Ryan, then Elouise, and Paul as a supplier. Let's go around that way and see what your thoughts are. So Ryan, what are your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so basically a bit of both. So in my role, I'm inside an organisation, and I've worked in the operations area as well, which at least in our organisation has a lot of demand for e-learning, and it's a bit of both. So for us, our compliance suite is externally developed, and a lot of that is kind of generic, if I'm honest. Whereas if you look at the operational area, a lot of it is very specific to our processes, our products, our systems, and that kind of thing. So we have an in-house team who will develop that e-learning. So a bit of a mixture.
Okay, thank you. And it's obviously finding kind of the right solution for whatever the presenting need is. Elouise, do you find something similar to Ryan or different for your area?
I think it's been quite interesting because I guess part of our challenge has been our cultural journey, and actually what we find our colleagues expect is that our learning actually reflects quite strongly our values, so we've embedded them through our recruitment, through our performance management, and also through our learning. So what we have found is that although kind of an off-the-shelf solution might meet for a sort of statutory mandatory perspective, it actually doesn't look and feel homified enough. So what we're finding is that we often work with suppliers who can almost just tweak things just to make sure the language is congruent, because we have certain words that are very much, you know, we refer to our staff in our organisation as colleagues, and actually that's quite important that we retain that as part of our culture. So I guess a direct off-the-shelf probably doesn't totally suit us unless it's a sort of a quick thing that maybe isn't a permanent part of our offering.
Okay, thank you, Elouise. I think that point about customization is really important. I'm working with a client now, and it's all about, well, that terminology doesn't work for us. So some systems allow for changing that, some don't. So that's an interesting point, something maybe to think about when you're speaking with your supplier. Paul, as a supplier, what is it that you find that your customers are asking you for? Is it off the shelf? Is it customized? Is it both?
So I think I very much echo what the two guys have said. Actually, customers, I think, are getting a bit more savvy about their expectations from suppliers, and we have certainly seen a bit of a bespoke backlash in the last year or so, where customers are really sick of being saddled with a very expensive bespoke solution that they can't maintain, change, upgrade, and so on. But on the other side, it's Elouise's point as well about, you know, an off-the-shelf solution that that jars with your customer values that can't be extended won't work either. So so at Learning Pool we've tried to go for sort of a middle ground in the middle and say okay, you know, so we've got a whole range of off the shelf e-learning content, but the key thing is that it's completely customizable by the customers. And when I look at the customers who've won by using that solution, it's customers who've had an itch that they needed to scratch for the corporate organization, be that very often it's compliance, but sometimes, you know, it's sales training or graduate development and supporting apprenticeship programs and so on. And they've taken an off-the-shelf product that they then were able to add that 20%, which is really where L&D teams, I think, can add real value by doing just what Elouise described, you know, changing the language, making it look like it grew up in the organization, and use it as an opportunity to get people bought into what you're trying to do as a business. And that certainly, we've seen a real growth in that expectation from the customer base, and the customers who are using that type of service from us are winning. And one of the things that we see really strongly in that when we look at the data is that customers who are using that product from us are winning on two fronts. One, the mobile piece is very important in that. So the solution we've built is also completely mobile ready, and that's driving engagement, not just on mobile, which we would expect, but engagement across the piece. And that engagement is leading to higher completions and longer dwell time and things like that on the content. So all the indications are that content is working better for our customers than simply off-the-shelf content on one hand or a fully bespoke solution on the other. So I think there's something smart in that. So yeah, that's a great question.
One thing that I'll
Go ahead, Ryan.
one thing that I'll add from the client's point of view is when we do get development outsourced, we ask that it's done in the software that we use in-house. And someone else has asked in the chat, what tools do we use? Storyline is becoming our standard. We do use Captivate as well for system simulations and that kind of thing. We have used Lectora in the past, but we're moving towards Storyline.
Great, thank you. We've had some other kind of suggestions here. So this is around that those e-learning modules, the kind of self-paced, click next e-learning. So these are some good examples here. Paul Norrington kind of continued on his question about is it off the shelf, is it customized, is it something in between, and asks, is that becoming easier to customize those things? So, you know, in the chat window, I think people are saying is, and Paul has certainly sort of said in the chat window that more modern tools are making customization easier. And whilst I'm not an e-learning module expert by any means, certainly I've seen that that's come a long way, even in the last 4 or 5 years that I've been looking at these things. So Ryan and Elouise especially, are you finding it's easier for you to have that input? And then we'll kind of come to Paul to round that question out before focusing on something else. So let's go to Elouise first of all. Are you finding that the more modern tools are making it easier for that customization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we're finding is, and I think I responded to Scott's question about our use of Articulate, what we want to make sure is there's certain sort of basic level skills within our business partner team, so they can actually create sort of small amounts of e-learning, so they can actually use them for a very specific, maybe short-term need that is very much driven by our organisation. But then what we do, very, very similar to, as Ryan mentioned, we then try and make sure that suppliers we work with can actually use Articulate, and that'll actually work with our sort of systems and be something that's actually familiar as well. We do occasionally buy other things, but actually most of the suppliers we do try and work with are the ones that can make those amendments and make those adjustments to really make it fit our needs.
Great, thank you. Ryan, any thoughts on that one too?
Yeah, I would echo those sentiments. And when it comes to customizing a generic module, what we're really talking about in our context is linking out to our intranet. And I think that's really a good idea because that content can change, that can be volatile, but the link remains the same. But if the link needs to be updated, then that's simple to do in something like Storyline, where we just make the update, repackage it, and upload it to the LMS again.
Okay, thank you. Paul, anything to add on that?
No, I think I'd certainly echo all of that. I think L&D people these days, I think, need to have a range of tools in their toolbox. And we've been using Microsoft Word for one thing and Microsoft PowerPoint for another for years, and in the non L&D world, and L&D has to be like that. But certainly, I think thinking that through, whether you're making a bespoke purchase or whether you're buying something off the shelf, in terms of how am I going to live with this technology, this content, whenever the world changes on me, is definitely an important question to be asking yourself, and an important challenge to be putting to your suppliers, because otherwise it can get pretty tricky.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge when all of these different things change. So Paul, whilst I'm with you, let me ask you a couple more questions. So we've got some questions coming in the chat pod, the question and answer pod from Scott Connor. So thank you for these, Scott. He says, how easy is it to customize off the shelf? Does the developer provide the source? And do you provide training for your customers on customization? So every company, I'm sure, will be different. What's your take on that first, Paul?
So it's a bit of a shameless plug here, but I am plugging something that's open source and free. Okay, so you give me a little bit of room. So we built Adapt with some other e-learning providers to allow us to do pretty much exactly what Scott's delivering. So what we do is we make the content available. We provide an online academy of support and some training for our customer users to be able to edit and extend that content, but we really encourage them to do it. And we've got some with Adapt. The interface for editing is pretty much like, it looks a bit like Adobe Connect or PowerPoint or something, and we're seeing the speed to competence of authors who are not tech, who are not necessarily really experienced e-learning people, really is shortening by the fact that the user interfaces are getting better, and people are doing a little bit of training online, pretty much like eating dog food, I think is the tech term for that, and getting up to speed. So yeah, that's how we do it. If you've got a storyline based solution, storyline's a pretty ubiquitous product these days. So if you're buying off the shelf content that's been built in storyline, should be pretty straightforward, and we've got lots of customers to do that too, and we consider ourselves fairly agnostic about the tech, although we do promote Adapt just because we're able to give it away pretty much for free, and let the content add the value.
Great, thank you. And obviously other products and services are available. But thank you, Paul. It's really good for sharing that. And that's why we wanted you here, to have that kind of viewpoint. So Ryan, let's come to you as maybe somebody who's not an IT guy, is what you said, but maybe a little bit more tech savvy. How are you seeing that point about, is it easy to update? Do you get training from your suppliers for your teams? How does that work for you? And then we'll ask Elouise before we move on to another subject.
Yeah, well, I definitely am more tech savvy, and I think that's more of an attitudinal thing rather than a capability kind of thing. And what I'm finding is a lot of people in the L&D field won't know how to update an online course, for example. They don't know how to use Storyline, they don't know how to use Adapt or anything like that. So then you've got, the e-learning guy, or maybe a couple of people who have that knowledge. I do find it a little bit curious, to be honest, and I don't know if other people in other countries are finding the same thing, where there's a little bit of resistance among our L&D colleagues to upskill in that in that field. But I think that's the future, and as I said, I'm surprised by it. I think if I were a garden variety L&D consultant or something like that, one of the things that I would be wanting to do is upskilling myself in these e-learning authoring tools.
Yeah, it's an interesting area about kind of what skills do we need for the future of learning and development. We've discussed that on a few webinars, actually, on training journal webinars, which you can go back to and have a look if you want. And certainly those kind of tech savvy skills are really interesting, and also they're kind of cross-platform, if you like. So, for example, I have a deep dive into the virtual webinar world. I'll be really honest, my e-learning kind of knowledge is probably about that big. It's not really that much at all, but it's about, I've got those technical skills and my learning and development skills. If I suddenly had to do that on a 6-month kind of job, do you know what? I could go and learn and pick up those things much easier because I've picked up other technical skills. And I think that's something that a lot of L&D people aren't necessarily picking up on, is those transferable skills. So Elouise, let's just finish out this topic. What's your experience with regards how easy it is to customize? Do you get training on those tools for your team? What's your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, we've worked with providers who've been really good, actually. They've given us some basic skills. I think one of the key skills that I guess I've needed my teams to have is more around the storyboarding, the sort of the design side, I should say, almost like the content and the flow of the learning, actually focusing on that, because I find that's kind of quite a skill in itself when developing some kind of e-learning or some kind of resources that are going to be quite engaging but get our message across. I think too often our learning came from we were buying things that actually followed an order that seemed to maybe make sense to the provider developing it, whereas actually we know our colleagues and we know the bits that we really need to reinforce, the parts that are challenges for us. So actually that, and working with providers who kind of get that sort of really collaborative co-creation of the things we need, and then also the sort of the ongoing tweaks to it as well, seems to work.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you've got different ideas, guys, to what Elouise is saying, is it about instructional design? Is it what I was saying about technical skills and what Ryan was saying? Is it something else? Do use that chat window. What I want to do, oh, we've lost Elouise again. Poor Elouise. She'll be back very soon, I'm sure. I do want to move on to another great question that we've had in Question Pod. Thank you, guys. From Stella. Stella says, I face cultural issues. I often hear managers tell me their staff just don't use computers. But I would argue they will be using mobile phones, etc. But getting that buy-in is difficult, particularly for staff in manual roles. So that's a really interesting question and challenge there. So, Ryan, are you facing that challenge where you're in financial services, so maybe that's not so many manual roles, but are you finding that kind of pushback on at all?
I've heard about this, and what springs to mind is a friend of mine who works for Coca-Cola in Australia, and Michelle Ockers is her name, and she had a similar situation whereby, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but there were people on the factory floor who didn't use computers on a daily basis, and she was trying to introduce a social learning program. And what eventually got them over the line was the WIFM factor, what's in it for me. And so by slowly but surely changing the attitude towards using computers to collaborate and to learn from each other, because these factories were in different states of the country, it ended up becoming a success because of that. And I think what this points to is the culture of the organization. And it might be that there are a lot of people who aren't familiar with computers or aren't comfortable with computers. But on the other side of the coin, I'd bet my bottom dollar they're all on Facebook. You know, half of them or more are using Netflix. So I don't think it's really about the technology. I think there are other factors at play there.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's a big cultural kind of issue going on, which is a really interesting one, and sometimes that can present itself with the challenge with technology. Other times it's kind of what's kind of behind that. So Paul, what about your point of view from a supplier point of view, because you're going to be the person trying to overcome that to some degree when somebody's saying, no, our people won't use computers. So how do you respond to that? And welcome back, Elouise.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big issue for almost all of our customers who have got, not necessarily always a big manual workforce, but certainly a big frontline workforce. So retail, hospitality, private healthcare in general, and government and so on. So, the challenges that our customers face are very much about, people who don't have email addresses, people who don't have access to mobile, access to desktop computers, all of that stuff, and that all stands in the way of a big uptake of your e-learning policy. I think the first thing to say is it's hard. It's not just hard for you. It's hard for, sorry, I forgot who the caller's name was, or the texter's name was, but this is a big challenge. I think where customers who we work with have succeeded here, and we've been able to see that success is where there's really the hammer, which is this is compliance e-learning. You have to get it done, and it has to get done, and therefore eventually it gets done. And that's sort of the hard way to do it, and it's effective, but potentially it's not going to do much for your culture. On the softer side, I think there are some things that you can do with the technology, which helps. So it's about reducing friction. So making sure that your learning technology solution works across multiple devices is a really big thing, and really does. And we've got tons of data to demonstrate that it does actually drive uptake and engagement. And some of the other things that people have succeeded in doing is, so most LMSs and most learning platforms have got some sort of social element, even if social learning feels like a bit of a distant sort of objective. And so what a lot of our customers have done is that they've really taken some of the best advice out of the MOOC world. So rather than saying, here's a whole ton of e-learning, go and do it, and then you're inducted, which, let's face it, it's never really going to work. They've used the technology that's available in their LMS to put people into cohorts of learners, to encourage them to collaborate together, to do sessions like this on a sort of weekly basis that people will get value out of, will get the opportunity to ask questions, will find out who the other people in the organization are who are working on the same stuff as them, particularly in big organizations that have got lots of people all over the place. And those smaller things, I think, are very, very effective. Not immediately. It takes time, and again, it's my first point. This is hard, but over time, those things can eventually shift the culture and get people to a place where they just go to your learning platform as the sort of go-to place for corporate knowledge, which is really, as an L&D team, what you want.
Thank you, Paul. And I like the fact that you're being really honest about the fact that it's not easy. And Elouise, I think you're facing this kind of challenge as well around culture and not having access to computers, maybe.
Yeah, so that was a big part of our cultural journey. Obviously, I think the reference being made before to sort of very operational. We are a care and support organisation primarily. It's quite vocational work people are drawn to. So we have the challenge of people saying technology isn't something I'm joining this organisation for. A lot of people on kind of, sort of lower salaries. It's about the connection with people. I guess the way we kind of very much mapped it out as part of our cultural journey and started with implementation of technology. Get people quite excited about some new technology, and then start to build on how it could be used, so how it can be used in client work, and actually show how it can actually enhance the work with the commissioners, the work with our clients. Little things we've done as well is introduce to encourage being quite a digital first organisation. Journey, not there yet, but we've implemented things like salary sacrifice for people to get their own kit and stuff. So what we've seen is massive uptake on sort of iPhones, iPads, but actually making it really affordable for people to get that. So actually technology becomes part of what we support people with more generally, not just focused on what we need them to do in their workplace. I think that's gone down really well. So, originally we had people going, oh, it's e-learning. We've explained the sort of financial savings we can make, and we're showing where we're reinvesting that. So being able to run management qualifications now, but letting anyone in the UK go, whereas maybe travel would have been prohibitive, is brilliant. So we're qualifying managers, but doing it in a way that costs us virtually nothing, so people can see where that money goes back in as a not-for-profit.
Wow, that sounds absolutely brilliant, Elouise. Just facing that challenge, and like Paul said, it's a challenge. It's not easy, and as you say, it's a journey. We're all on a journey in different areas, and actually kind of making those steps and going forward is absolutely brilliant. And in the chat window, you've got people saying great approach. Stella says, great point, Elouise. Helping staff purchase the kit is brilliant, not just for work, for their own social lives too. And Paul Norrington says, how about giving employees a small budget to learn something outside of work using learning technology? That's an interesting one. So any comments on that, guys, before we move on?
That's a constant where I work. Sorry, Elouise, after
Ryan,
you.
tell us more. No, Ryan, tell us more. It's a constant where you work, you say.
Yeah, so it's a question of what you spend your money on, and the the traditional approach has been that you go off and do a course somewhere, or you go to a conference, which can be good. But I think increasingly we need to turn our attention to other possibilities, and it might be an online course or something like that. That's definitely the direction we need to be going.
And Elouise, did you want to add something about that, about the kind of learning outside of work? Oh, have we lost Louise again?
No, I think
Elouise,
just very
there?
much, we've sort of just tried to make. Oh, is it working? Is it going okay?
Yeah, you're a little bit slow, but we've still got you.
Yeah. No, thanks. Yeah, I guess it's just sort of making it more broad, as exactly as you said. We do salary sacrifice for learning quals as well as the tech, and just trying to sort of make it more broad, that actually people start to look at learning in a bit of a different way. They don't think of it as a classic face-to-face. I know I went to one event and I put this to our senior team, but they didn't buy into it. But one organisation bought everyone iPads and said, if you take an iPad, you're signing up to doing all your e-learning and things like that in this organisation as long as you're here. And I think they got up to about it was pretty much 100%. So it was a bit of an innovative way, but it saved the organisation work having to chase people and have people doing that. So it was something we thought about, but probably couldn't really do as a not-for-profit.
Yeah, it's one of those challenges. It's always about finding the right, the technology, but also the approach. That is it a campaign learning? Is it a blended approach? I think Stella mentioned that right at the very beginning of the session. So it's finding all of those right bits for you and your organisation. Great, guys. Thank you very much. Let's move on to another question. And this comes from our editor, Debbie. She says, rather than focusing on the actual technology, how do you see technology improving your status as an L&D professional today? Does social media help build your skill set and network to again give you more status in your business? And I think this is a really interesting one. And perhaps, Elouise, as a TJ Award winner, I'm going to come to you first on this one. So how do you see the kind of the technology, the social media, the networking, how has that helped you in your organisation?
I think it massively helps you stay up to date. Years ago you'd have to attend events and things like that to actually stay up to date, but participating, particularly I really like LinkedIn, sort of forums, just picking up tiny nuggets of sort of information gets you thinking, you check things out, and it just means you're really credible and current with what you're taking to senior team or managers within an organisation. I think it's just that sort of like groupthink idea. People have got fantastic ideas and it triggers something for you to use in your organisation, so it's made a huge difference to me.
Great, thank you very much. We actually did have a whole webinar session talking about this, and I think Constantidis, I think you were discussing that, and he's in our chat room today. So Paul, what about from your point of view the social media element and about kind of developing yourself as an L&D professional?
Yeah, I think we all use social media and online stuff for a range of reasons, lots of which are about just learning what's going on, and as Elouise said, staying current, and that definitely is a requirement of any profession these days. I think, and L&D is no different. I think L&D is probably fortunate in that there is actually quite an interesting and in fairness, generous online community around L&D, people who are prepared to share, to help out, to offer advice and so on. So I think L&D has some unique opportunities in that, and I'm sure maybe Ryan might agree that in the financial services world, it's perhaps not as it's probably not as friendly sometimes, maybe not all the time, but certainly L&D I think is a good thing to do, and we certainly encourage all of our customers to interact with us through social media, and as a supplier, it helps that we use social media to help stay current ourselves and what's going on, and hopefully spot the latest trends.
Sounds good. Thank you, Paul. And Ryan, what are your thoughts on this?
Yes, in regards to status, that's something that I put aside, and I would be active on Twitter and blogging and reading people's blogs regardless, because I get so much from it. I learn from other people. But it's funny, people, my colleagues at work who aren't in L&D, know that I'm active in social media, therefore they have confidence in what I am saying because they feel that it's contemporary and up to date. So that's actually an element that I hadn't thought about until now. But that's just become clear to me that by being the people that you're dealing with don't have to be active in the same space, but because they know that you are active in that space, they have more confidence in what you do.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about that. Paul Norrington says, like Elouise, I find LinkedIn the most helpful so far. So Paul, do tell us a little bit more about how you find LinkedIn useful, because everybody will find their own way of working, their own little network. So for instance, I do use LinkedIn. I don't use it extensively. I've got my own blog, obviously I've got the TJ work that I do, and I'm a bit more of a Twitter user. So as Ryan was mentioning, it's about being in those different spaces but using them kind of more appropriately. And we've got some links coming through and some different reports that are being mentioned. James Hampton, you say beginning to use it in further education with our staff and encourage our lecturers to build a professional network. And I think that professional network is a really interesting one, because I certainly have benefited from that. You know, I put a tweet out or maybe something on my blog or LinkedIn or even Facebook, and I go, how do I do this? Or please help me out with that, or the other way round. And we've also got our training journal forum, which is another place that you can go and do these things. So all of these are great places to go and have a look. So Anne Tilbury, you say social media can help you keep across multiple sectors and areas of interest. For me, it's learning and development, higher education, leadership, etc. Twitter is great for following key thinkers in a range of areas. And I think that's really a good point. So Paul, do you find, especially in your role with you're working with multiple different companies, that you actually almost have to be maybe an instant expert in those different areas? How do you keep up with those different kind of industries maybe?
Yeah, certainly it's a big challenge for us as a supplier to stay current with what's happening across a range of sectors, and our approach is to I think every supplier, to be honest, has to have experience that's a mile wide and hopefully a little bit more than an inch deep. But that tends to be the way sometimes. But our approach is to have domain experts in the team who understand that sector and focus on that sector, because I think as a supplier you really want to make sure that you're addressing the proper issue for the customer, and the only way to do that is to know the challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, absolutely. About 1 million years ago in my career, I was a website designer, and I always loved it because I became like an instant, as you say, one inch deep, superficial expert in chimney pots or whatever it was that I was designing a website for that week. And one of them was chimney pots and flues. I learned an awful lot. So I could have about a 10-minute conversation in great depth, and after that I was lost. But it is interesting, and one of the things we talk about with professional development is not actually being stuck in the learning and development bubble and kind of broadening that out. And Paul had said LinkedIn is great for help, and he's often been bowled over by responses. And John McMillan says, I agree with Anne. Twitter can also connect different organisations in the same sector. Staff from other colleges and universities often share their ideas and experience on Twitter, which is great. Now, I think that's a really important area of that sharing and that collaboration. And what's Con saying here? Facebook is about who you used to know. Twitter is about who you need to know. Well, that's an interesting way of putting it, Con. Thanks. Now, earlier on in the chat window, Anne had made a comment about collaboration or co-collaboration and ownership of the learning content by the learners feels like a key element of engaging. Now, you've put e-learning here, Anne, because that's what we were talking about at the time. I think that's possibly with all learning. So we know that we've got to have our network of people through Twitter or LinkedIn or wherever it is that we can find those thought leaders and the people we follow for tomorrow, as Con has just said. But also, what about within our organisation and our learners? So Ryan, let me come to you on that one first of all. What are you seeing in terms of kind of collaborating with learners and that internal network in your organisation?
It has to happen, and I'm actually surprised at how long the traditional L&D model has lasted, because it just seems so unsustainable. You have a relatively few number of people who are the experts or the trainers who tell everyone how it's done, and it's a little bit ridiculous because you're telling the people who do it every day for a living. So I think that has to change. I think it will change. I agree with Anne. You really get the buy-in when the people in the organisation have had a hand in creating the content. I think, though, there is a challenge in terms of the incentive for creating the content. If you're in a competitive environment, you might not want to do that because that you might see it as being a disservice to yourself. But also, if your attitude is right and you do want to help your colleagues and all of that, there's always something in the way. You might not have enough time or something like that. So I think user-generated content is a fantastic idea, but it needs a strategy behind it to make it work.
Thank you very much for that, Ryan. I think it's a really interesting point about very traditional methods versus more up-to-date methods, and what can we take from the traditional methods that are still working if we do them really well, and what actually we need to modernise. Elouise, what are your thoughts on this one? Oh, Elouise, you're on mute. Let me unmute you.
Sorry.
There you go.
Okay. I think for us, we use our subject matter experts for all our learning development. So, yeah, okay. So our subject matter experts. So we see very much, as Ryan said there, that we are actually, our skill is in learning and development of learning approaches, but not actually the specific knowledge. So we use subject matter experts who are part of our colleague forums. So our colleague forums are representatives, our values ambassadors from across the business who actually review our learning materials and learning approaches. And we also have a lot of co-delivery and co-development models, so our managers get development by being developed as facilitators. One of our most recent was our Collections Academy, which was aimed at collecting and protecting income for the social housing arm. But we kind of find that actually it adds that credibility to the materials and the programs we put out. If people know their colleagues or people who they respect and know do the job on a day-to-day basis have had input and developed it, so it's a win-win for us because it means there's that openness when they come through the door or log in to undertake the learning.
That's fabulous, and that much more modern approach. It's about keeping the learning in the business. It's about being very business and organisation specific rather than just, well, how do I do this in Word? Well, yeah, but how do I do this in Word here with our setup and our styles and our whatever it might be, just as an example. So I think that's a really important point. Thank you, Elouise. Paul, how about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think L&D does and should learn a lot of its lessons from the rest of the world, really, particularly I think in this context, the rest of the web world. So, if you look at things like WordPress democratized web publication, and so I think learning and development has a chance to democratize how it builds content. And I think L&D's role shouldn't necessarily be just about building all of the content. It should be about, as Elouise said, working with subject matter experts, but hopefully using the technology to make that easier. I think we've seen some examples, some pretty disastrous examples where subject matter experts went and built the content, and L&D people and e-learning people are good at making content work online, and they should do that. But the other point of this, I think, is that I think the smart people that we see building content programs aren't building it all themselves because it's already there. The web is teeming with awesome content, especially things like video content that really add value to learning programs, whether it's a scenario, whether it's a TED Talk in a leadership program or whatever, and pulling that all together with some off-the-shelf content, with some bespoke content, with some great subject matter expertise is the new L&D skill when it comes to content, I think. And the technology is getting there in terms of making that happen, and certainly I think that's where we see a lot of our customers winning these days is in using a mix of tools to do that.
That sounds great, and it goes back to that point about our development development of our technical skills. And there's all sorts of areas that as L&D we need to be good at, and communication is one of them, and I'll tell you about our webinar next month about that, which includes things like performance consulting, about asking questions, getting to the bottom of need, but also, you know, we're focusing a bit more on the technology element here. So Stella, let me come to you. Now we know that your microphone's working, so I'm going to unmute that because it's fabulous to have our attendee voice here. Now you say here in the chat window you're looking to introduce short video clip as an alternative to reading through learning guides. Tell us more about kind of why you've decided that and why you think that's going to be good.
Well, I work for a Western Bartonshire Council, and we've recently introduced self-service. So for a lot of people who previously maybe had pay slips coming through in a paper base to home or their workplace, we had moved them onto self-service and had a full guide. Now my team take the phone calls from people who can't access. So it was a complete failure demand. People would not read through a long lengthy guide. And it made sense to me because at home I don't read through a lengthy guide. I flick to the quick guide, I go into YouTube, I Google it, I find a video clip. So that's, for a lot of people, their learning style, and we weren't providing that. So one of our biggest constraints, as you can imagine, in local government is budget. So I always have to try and find the low cost or the free solution that will allow me to still provide that type of learning. But that's my introduction, but it is to look at, I mean, I sit within HR, so I have a lot of lengthy dry policies that I have to try and get across. So it is about us starting down this journey and me being able to evidence that this is the way we need to go to a senior management team who might be thinking, why do you not just make people read it? And I can't make people read anything.
Oh gosh, and the joy of reading through a policy. I remember the last organisation I joined, and just the policy upon policy upon policy and page to page. Who reads those? Generally, what do we all do? We skip to the bottom and click, yes, I've read this, when we really haven't. So yeah, the video I think brings it to life maybe. Is that what you're trying to look for, Stella? Yes,
definitely. Something that people can have a face even and have us chat through, and this actual session in itself has started to make me think about, we could be doing this. I could have my users having this, say my HR experts sitting with, you know, people logging in to say, do you have questions on code of conduct on a particular policy? Do we need to come into a chat room and do that? That would be so much easier for me as well to have a couple of hours dedicated rather than have, you know, 20, 30 emails over the course of the week. So it's certainly, this session for me has made me think we need to be doing this differently and using, I spoke about before, this blend. But as you said, you don't know what you don't know. So, you know, this is in itself has been a learning experience for me to say this might be one of our solutions.
Oh, Stella, talk about music to my ears, and please do keep in touch with us about that, because it's the kind of thing, oh, poor Elouise, off she goes again. It was the kind of thing that we would absolutely love to hear about how you're developing that journey, and especially if we've been a little tiny nugget of inspiration, that would be good too. And I think you make a really good point here, Stella, thank you so much for coming on the session, about using the technology in different ways. We've talked about that a little bit. So as I've said, I do much more webinar or virtual style training, and a lot of the people that I'm working with are saying, well, actually, we don't want, or we can't afford, or it's not appropriate for you to come and do training, but actually we just want an hour online where we can have a chat through something. So that's a really interesting point. It makes it much more lively, it makes it much more interesting, and about bringing that technology together in whatever is right for you guys. Okay, and there's some more stuff in the chat window being shared, some websites and things which are looking good. Con says, Stella, I believe video is going to revolutionise learning in a big way, especially live video streaming via Periscope and Blab. And actually, Con's written something about that in our next issue of Training Journal, so you can look out for that a little bit later on. I can't believe the time is flying so quickly. We have, let's have a look. we've got two more questions that we are going to answer. The first one is from Paul Norrington. He says, anyone tried building mini e-learning modules within live sessions? For example, launching a 2-minute learning bite that people complete individually within an Adobe Connect window itself. So I'm going to actually jump in on this one just a little bit, Paul. I don't do it all that much, but I have used actually Flash files or SWF Shockwave files in Adobe Connect to do similar stuff to that. So I don't do it that often because my feeling generally is more about if you can do it outside of the live session, do that. But I have done that. Any quick comments on that? Maybe Ryan?
I have not. That's my answer to the question, but I'm thinking that if I were to do something in that regard, I would focus more on the assessments. So towards the end of the live session, let everyone then and there demonstrate that they are competent with the knowledge.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Elouise, any thoughts?
Yeah, not something that we have used because we tend, very much like Ryan was saying there, we try and sort of pull it back to an assessment and a check-in and maybe some kind of interactive rather than getting people doing their own things whilst on an e-learning.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, I seem to recall you don't do so much in that kind of virtual space, but do correct me if I'm wrong. Any thoughts on that question?
I think on the bite-sized chunks piece, I think there is something very interesting here. You know, in the end, what everyone involved in this space is trying to do is to drive learner recall. What we're trying to do is make people remember stuff so that they can apply it to their job, stop doing a thing that they used to do, or do something differently. And learner recall is a very tricky thing. So bite-sized chunks of learning are a really effective way of doing that, but only the science says if it's done in a way that, and the science that we certainly find most credible at Learning Pool is about spaced practice. So you know, if you're delivering content like that, I think there's a trap, I think, which is to try and deliver too much content too quickly in too many mediums all at the same time, and that the brain can't cope with that, and therefore it doesn't work. So spaced practice says actually take a step back from that, elongate the learning process so that if you deliver a virtual webinar in the morning, you deliver some spaced practice in the afternoon so that by the time the learner is putting the kids to bed, they haven't forgotten everything that they learned on the webinar. And there's loads of different ways you can do that, as Ryan said, by reinforcing that assessment, by delivering space. We've got an app, for example, that delivers space content reminders to people's phones an hour a week, a day, 3 days after the content's been delivered. And all of that is designed to boost learner recall. And learner recall is a tricky thing, especially on mobile devices and also with video. People really enjoy video and find it an immersive experience, but the science says that they don't remember that much. So I think, you know, while I agree with Con's point that video has a big role to play here, I think there is something about just being careful not to assume that you can cut everything to video and that's it, because it's not, and you've got to work a little bit harder to really think about how people are going to remember what it is that they're learning in the learning experience, and because ultimately if they don't remember it, they can't apply it to the workplace. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant.
But it was an interesting and very useful rant, Paul, so thank you very much. And I think those are kind of interesting points that you make. And whilst we know that video is massively important for engagement, it's massively important for involving people and getting them into a topic maybe, and presenting a topic in a different way, exactly like Stella was talking about earlier on, we do have to think about, you know, some people don't like that. And just as a really quick example, my brother YouTubes everything. 8 years my junior, and I'm not that old. And but on the other hand, I hardly ever YouTube something. I don't want to watch a 3-minute video and like bored. What I want to do is go scan, found the bit that I want. So it's just interesting how is it different generations, different approaches, different things that we think about. Well, we are at the end of our session, so I'm just going to let Elouise join us back again very quickly so that we can say thank you. And she's disappeared again. Oh, poor Elouise having all of these problems. Well, thank you all for your questions in the session. Ryan, Paul and Elouise, even though she's not here, thank you so much for your time today. We have massively appreciated all of your insight, all of your thoughts. Now at the bottom there on the link section is a whole load of information. You've got our next webinar, you've got our webinar recordings where this webinar will be very shortly. You can register for our next webinar. If you are thinking you'd like a company webinar from Training Journal yourself or sponsorship, you can contact our business development manager, Monica Lofe. She's absolutely delightful and lovely, and she's very, very nice to chat to. And you've got Paul, Elouise's and Tracey's details there. So our webinar will be online very soon. You'll be able to go and have a look at it. You can join us on Twitter, as you well know, if you want to have a look at the conversation. We have our Training Journal forum where you can go and kind of continue the discussion. There's a particular thread that I've started already on this topic. And next webinar, that is September the 15th. Con is with us in the chat window right now. He is going to be talking with us. We also have Neville Pritchard, and it's all about communication. We've touched on a few of these things a little bit today, but we're going to have that deep dive, maybe a bit more than that inch deep, as Paul was saying earlier on, into whether communication is the most important competency we need for our future in L&D. You know, today we might have argued that it was technology, but that's what we're looking at in the future. So Elouise, Paul and Ryan, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Joe. Good fun. Thanks, everyone.
And Elouise, are you back? Thank you very much. So thank you, guys. That's the end of our session. Thank you. Hope to